Chapter 109. Elder, will Sahyung win? Seeing the elder tightly biting his lips, the disciple asked cautiously. Sama-seung parted his lips to answer as a stream of blood trickled down his chin. Will he win? It was an absurd question. He has to win, no matter what. If that monster's wings aren't broken today, then he would continue to soar further into the sky. Once that monster ascends, no one will ever be able to catch up. From that moment on, that monster would become a dragon. This might be the last chance. It might be the worst case scenario, but Sama-seung hadn't given up hope. It'll be possible for Chung Myung. Although he was also a second-class disciple, Sama-seung had faith in him. Chung Myung's abilities stood far above the others. Although Sama-seung had spoken harshly to him, he firmly believed that Chung Myung could stand among the best in the world with enough luck. In other words, if Chung Myung cannot defeat that child, then no one in this world within that age range would be able to stop Chung Myung. In other words, if Chung Myung defeats Chung Myung today, then Chung Myung will naturally take his place as the strongest in his generation. That outcome was unacceptable. We should have stopped him sooner. Even if they had been criticized, Mount Hua should have been exterminated before it came to this. This was the result of them not destroying Mount Hua properly. Damn those Mount Hua bastards. Sama-seung glared at them. He could not allow history to remember this day as the Jungnam Sect's disgrace. Never. At that moment, Chung Myung's sword began to bloom like a fantasy. Sama-seung clenched his fist as he watched the 12-movement snow flower sword technique unfold perfectly. This sword will take your breath away. Chung Myung looked at the sword. Similar. The movement was copied really well. The splendor, the beauty of a single flower as if it was alive and breathing, and a keen fatal blow hidden behind the beauty. Truly, the 24-movement plum blossom sword technique. It is different from what Lee Song-baek performed. If Lee Song-baek's sword was merely an imitation of Mount Hua's technique, then Chung Myung's sword had an elegance that even Chung Myung might admire. Anyone bearing witness to such a fantastic sword would end up praising it. But the person in front of Chung Myung was Chung Myung, and he avoided the sword. Swish! Chung Myung's sword cut the hem of Chung Myung's robe. Swish! The tip of his hair was also cut. Swish! Soon, it brushed past Chung Myung's cheek. A red line appeared and a drop of blood trickled down. Chung Myung easily stepped back and raised a finger to wipe away the flowing blood before licking his finger. Bittersweet. You won't be able to defeat me by running away like that. Hearing Chung Myung's provocation, Chung Myung simply looked back at him in silence. Chung Myung's eyes revealed a sense of peace, and he appeared relaxed. Once upon a time, Mount Hua made a name for itself with a sword resembling a flower, right? But that's a story of the past. Now, even those legends will be buried beneath the Jungnam Sect's new sword. The world will remember the tales of my sect and forget the sword of Mount Hua. Chung Myung quietly listened without responding. The ancestors of my sect created this technique to show the world that the Jungnam Sect's swordsmanship will always be superior to Mount Hua's. I honestly believe that it was a meaningless act. What's the point in proving our superiority over a dying sect? However, Chung Myung spoke in a cold voice. There is a meaning in this sword technique being the one that severs the last breath from Mount Hua. Come, I will end this dying legacy. Arrogant words, but it was a poignant talk. However, Chung Myung's reaction to this was different from what Chung Myung expected. Chung Myung covered his mouth and then began to lose himself in laughter. What are you doing? Chung Myung, who struggled to hold back his laughter, shook his hand with his head down. No, I'm trying, but I just can't hold it back anymore. Chung Myung smiled, revealed his teeth, and raised his sword at Chung Myung. I enjoyed the show. That act, well, it's more like a clown. Clown? Right, I enjoyed that clumsy impersonation. Even I can do it if it's only at that level. Jin-gum-ryung's face was distorted. He gnashed his teeth and his forehead crumpled. How dare you compare my sword to a mimicry? Don't get me wrong, it isn't like I'm looking down on you. Rather, it's the sword technique. Or perhaps it's the Jongnam sect who invented the technique that I'm looking down on. Jin-gum-ryung glared at Chung Myung, yet Chung Myung didn't back down. You don't need to glare at me like that. I'm going to give you a gift. I'll fill the void in that sword technique. It would be better for you to think about how you can escape with your body intact. I don't think that's something that a person who could barely touch their opponent should say. Jin-gum-ryung flinched. The 12 movement snowflower sword technique. The opponent shouldn't be able to distinguish between genuine strikes and illusory falsehoods. So wouldn't it be impossible for Chung Myung to avoid it? Jin-gum-ryung's knuckles turned white as he clenched his sword. Chung Myung wouldn't be able to survive once this technique was displayed, and Mount Hua wouldn't dare to ask Jin-gum-ryung to pay for his actions either. If they pressed charges, they would have to deal with the entire Jongnam sect. In the end, the strong dominates the weak. The weak may complain about injustice, but they can never punish the strong, an absolute law that can never be changed. However, Chung Myung brutally interrupted Jin-gum-ryung. I will ask you one thing. It was an unfamiliar tone. Just what is that sword? What do you mean? No, don't bother. That's enough. Chung Myung shook his head. It meant that he meant nothing. Chung Myung suppressed his true intention and spoke with a smirk in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. That's a pretty good imitation, but it won't be enough. Mount Hua's sword is faster, sharper, and more dazzling. Everyone certainly heard that declaration. With this, the Jongnam sect would be unable to escape from the curse. Even now, you've got a big mouth. If you find a way to kill my mouth, let me know. Anyway, you're the one that's been doing all the talking for a while. Jin-gum-ryung moved his sword, deciding not to exchange words anymore. He was going to fight it out and not talk. One win. Just one win. His sword was splendid and swiftly traversed through the air. The ki, emanating from the sword, began to form vivid flower patterns. One win. And another win in a different aspect. Soon, the flowers created by Jin-gum-ryung began to cover the area. As beautiful as can be, yet equally as dangerous. You will die by this sword. 12 movement snowflower sword technique. Jin-gum-ryung displayed the perfect version of this technique, the snowflower full heaven. The flower that dyed the world in white began to wrap around Chung Myung as if wanting to tear his body to shreds. Chung Myung! Screams erupted from all around. The disciples of Mount Hua, who were silently watching as if possessed, jumped up from their seats at once. They knew just how dangerous that sword could be. They didn't want to have to be there to know. Just looking at it from afar was enough to make goosebumps rise and their hearts skip a beat. Chung Myung, whose strength always instilled confidence and faith in them, suddenly seemed to have fallen into a dangerous situation where his survival was uncertain. Yoonjung clasped his hands in front of his chest without realizing it. Heavenly God! Jin-gum-ryung's sword was so fierce that they worried for the safety of the monster like Chung Myung. It seemed like no one could survive in that storm of snowflowers. Even Baekchun was screaming for Chung Myung. All but just one. Yoo Yi-sol bit her lip as she looked at the scene without much agitation. However, a single question crossed her mind. That's a sight she has seen before. Perhaps it was something familiar too. Something she'd seen recently. But different. Something felt different. This sword wasn't too different from what she knew. However, it didn't give that same feeling of her soul being sucked in like Chung Myung's sword. What was different? Yoo Yi-sol turned her sights to Chung Myung. He would be the one to tell them what was different. Chung Myung had a subtle expression as he looked at the waves of flowers around. This is another kind of experience. It was different from when he was with his Sahyungs. It was rare to feel true killing intent from his Sahyungs. This might be how those demonic bastards felt when they faced the 24 movement plum blossom sword technique. Maybe a little different. Chung Myung felt no threat, no pressure at all from this technique. Why? This is just a shell. Exactly, the shell of a failed sword. A technique begins with an idea, then a vision for how it will be displayed. Once the vision is formed, it must be granted substance. A sword that's given substance can be taught and learned. A sword that goes further than that can finally be called one with the Tao. But this sword was empty. The idea and vision formed the shell of the sword, but there was no substance or deeper meaning. It could never be a true sword technique. This sword was nothing but a copy of Mount Hua's sword, a shell with no opportunity for growth. This all happened because of a long-time misunderstanding. The plum blossom sword technique makes flowers bloom? That is wrong in two ways. 1. Chung Myung began to move his sword slowly. The disciples of Mount Hua recognized it right away. The 7 sages' sword. The disciples all knew that this technique was recently brought back to the sect, but it seemed like a weak choice against the Hua Sect's technique. At that time, Chung Myung mumbled to himself, "It isn't the plum blossom sword technique that makes the flowers bloom. Flowers don't just bloom in dense forests. Even a single plum tree on a cliff can make flowers bloom." Whether it was the plum blossom or 7 sages' sword technique, it wasn't the technique that made the flowers bloom, but the disciple who held the sword. It was then a faint flower bloomed at the tip of Chung Myung's sword. A single red flower bloomed amidst the sword aura of the 12-movement snow flower sword technique, which seemingly colored the world white. It looked like a single snow blossom blooming on a snowy mountain. Snow plum blossoms bloom alone in the winter when the flower turns dry, and it gives off a stronger fragrance than others. Chung Myung's single plum blossom gradually multiplied and soon covered the white world with red plum blossoms, like snow plums blossoming on a snow-capped Mount Hua. Everyone witnessing this event was mesmerized. It was too beautiful to be swordsmanship and too majestic to be a man-made scene. This is an illusion. Time stopped. In that frozen moment, only the plum blossoms that bloomed at that moment continued to release a scent so strong that they captivated the audience's senses.